Hello, hello. It's me, Arden Lee, and in today's video, I want to start unpacking the topic of executive dysfunction, and I want to talk a little bit about how it relates to motivation and also how it relates to the way that we integrate and process. Before I get into that topic, of course, if you are not yet familiar with me or my work, my name is Arden Lee, and I am the creator of the Repatterning Project, which is an 8-week course along with an online community, and you can find out more about that by going to the description box, and you can look at the link to the free PDF guide that I have written about the repatterning modality to learn a little bit more about it. And you can also join our free group on Facebook, the Repatterning Parlor, full of like-minded individuals who are also looking to hack their beliefs and optimize their mindsets for happiness and success. So do come and join us. I would love to see you there. I moderate that group, so if you do come and say hi and let me know that you found it on the YouTube channel. I would be interested to hear where everyone's coming from. So without further ado, let's talk about executive dysfunction. Executive dysfunction is essentially, I want to say it's something that that people are still kind of learning about and still kind of discussing. As far as my sort of light research has taken me so far, people tend to not be talking about it so much in normal society and more in learning environments, like in schools, where that tends to be pronounced and most prominent. Executive dysfunction is essentially a neurological condition, or at the very least a symptom or trait that seems to accompany neurological conditions, and it makes it very impossible to get things done, even though you know what you need to do and you may have everything sort of plotted out before you, but you feel this sort of paralysis about actually doing it. And so people are starting to talk a little bit more now about how executive dysfunction has so long been mistaken for laziness, for lack of motivation, etc., etc. And yet people who discuss executive dysfunction, who feel that they personally suffer from it, report that they know exactly what it is that they have to do and they want to do it. It's just that when it comes to actually connecting that motivation to doing something itself, that it's very hard for them to become motivated, and it's hard for them to do it. So for example, I read an article by one person who has executive dysfunction, and she was talking about the idea of writing a research paper. And she says, in theory, I know everything that you're supposed to do, write the outline, have your thesis essentially, go and do your research, take your notes, make your citations, and type up the paper. She says, and I can explain that to you. I can talk you through all the steps that I know I'm supposed to do. But when someone throws that at me, my brain just kind of goes, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to procrastinate or whatever. And I have, times when I go in and out of this sort of feeling myself of executive dysfunction. I haven't, received any kind of diagnosis about it. I don't want to trivialize it in the way that so many people trivialize mental health conditions by saying like, oh, I alphabetize all my CDs, therefore I'm OCD. I don't want to do that, but what I do want to do is I do want to look at the ways that mental health conditions such as executive dysfunction can perhaps be a little more malleable than we might assume. Same way that I uploaded a video last week about whether addiction is a learning disorder, not necessarily a learning disorder like dyslexia might be, but rather a learning disorder that that means that the reason that we keep repeating certain behaviors is because they are learned responses to stimuli that our bodies sort of adapt and then keep doing. So I want to talk about executive dysfunction in this manner, and since it's something that's really interesting me lately, I have a feeling that I will come back and revisit this topic again when I'm even more informed about it. But what I want to do in today's video is just sort of start unpacking this topic so that we can kind of look at it, because I feel like a lot of us are going through a lot of trauma on a mass level right now, whether it's actual trauma or whether it's simply a re-triggering of all our former traumas being brought up. You see this nowhere more clearly than in the Me Too movement, for example, where women all across the country and indeed across the world are coming forward, and they're saying, wow, all of this stuff that is being described by other women coming forward has also happened to me too, hence the name, and now it's being brought up for me in ways that I had repressed previously, and now I'm being made to actually face the things that have happened to me in order to process and heal them. So in a way, we have this sort of mass focus on trauma that's been coming up in the past couple of years. And I think that it's probably no surprise that we're starting to hear more and more about executive dysfunction as well. I know that I started learning about it when someone that I follow on Twitter was talking about, about executive dysfunction and about it being, being different from laziness, being different from lack of motivation, that sense of like, no, I want to do this. It's not that I don't want to do it. I want to get up out of bed and I want to start, my homework or my project, or, making all my YouTube videos, or like whatever it is, but for whatever reason, I'm just sort of like stuck here. I'm paralyzed. I can't remember what I was supposed to do next. And in so many cases, we're looking to neurodivergence for explanations to that. We're looking to, because it is a trait that seems to be comorbid, by which I mean it tends to go along with things like ADD, ADHD, autism, and other neurodivergent states or qualities or conditions that that deal with attention. So I don't want to minimize the importance and the specificity of executive dysfunction by trying to remove it from the way that it is comorbid with pre-existing disorders and maybe a serious symptom of mental health. However, at the same time, I also don't want to rule out the trend that I see of people discussing this more and more, and looking also at all the traumas that are in our world currently that so many people are processing. So one of the things that has cropped up for me in particular is that, there is such a thing called trauma brain. That's not a technical term, of course, but it is something that's real. It's something that I was warned about, or at least informed of when I was, on my own personal healing journey. So I remember a very specific day, where it was like a whole bunch of things happened. I was supposed to, it was my mom's birthday, and I had been thinking about my mom all weekend and remembering like, oh, my mom's birthday is coming up. I had better call her today. And it was like, even on her actual birthday, I remember having that thought like, oh, I got to remember to call my mom for her birthday. I just didn't make the connection that day that it was actually her birthday. So I forgot. And I called her the next day and I apologized. But that same day, I also paid for my lunch at the counter at the place I was going to lunch at. I paid for it with a $100 bill and almost forgot to walk away with, the like $80-something and change that I was having handed back to me. And I, the cashier had to like be like, wait, miss, your change, and pardon my sniffles today. I think that Virgil probably got a little too close to my face a little earlier. And in addition, I was going to a potluck dinner that night, and everyone knew I was kind of going through stuff, so I was like, I'll just pick up some some vegetables for us to all like cook up together while other people are bringing other things too. So I stopped to pick up a zucchini at the grocery store, and I even remember my thought process. I remember looking and being like, wow, this one is so much bigger. Let me get this one that was like sitting just to, the other side of it. And I brought it to the potluck and it turned out to be a cucumber. And I was like, I just wasn't paying attention, right? But it's not because I wasn't paying attention. It was actually because I was going through some pretty deep trauma healing and my brain was elsewhere. And when you're going through these deep integrative processes, it is entirely possible, this is why we sort of dissociate from the present moment in the first place. but it's really much more common than I think we like to talk about, that we require more space and more rest to integrate. And I think honestly, I think so much of what we're looking at as executive dysfunction is quite possibly symptomatic of really like a mass trauma healing that is going on. And when you do have those moments where you're like, you're realizing things and you're integrating things, and you're like, it works all along the timeline essentially. Because if you're learning new things about what trauma is and what it means for you, then that exists not only in the present moment, but you're looking at going all the way across your timeline, all the way back, and changing all of those layers by realizing that certain things that happened to you were not the sort of coping mechanism stories that you made about them at the time. So it's really important to look at that and to forgive yourself, and really I think it's important that we start asking ourselves more questions about this and being like, is executive dysfunction really perhaps just symptomatic of needing more integration and needing more rest in these times of difficulty and stress and trauma and trials and tribulations that we're undergoing? Is it actually maybe, is it maybe an adaptive mechanism that's helping us to actually heal faster? And it doesn't, it's not particularly convenient. It's not particularly fun necessarily to have to work so hard to motivate yourself to do things that seem to come to naturally to people who are just existing, in their quite normal existence. It's not necessarily a fun adaptation, but it might be useful for us nonetheless. If we are indeed learning and integrating so much, then there is often reason why we need to sort of suspend, our judgment, our ability to make plans, because it kind of makes sense. Of course, your ability to make plans would be suspended if you are currently changing your relationship to the past, because of course your relationship to the future is going to change too. And perhaps on some level your body knows that. Perhaps on some level executive dysfunction is a way of saying, like, is this research paper really all that important in the long run? How are you feeling? How are you feeling in your body today? Obviously, we don't want to get stuck there either. We want to be able to process through that and move on. But one of the things I've noticed is that whenever I have really huge shifts, there are times that I can't get out of bed for days at a time. And that's also why I've made a video about how to feel more energized that you'll also find on this channel, because I do think it's important to make sure that we get out of those habits, that we don't learn them and get into that, neurological groove with them where that kind of becomes our normal. It's important to hit that reset button, but I think it's also important to look at how these things are symptomatic, of our present circumstances and why they might be cropping up for us in particular. So as I said before, I suspect that I will touch on this more in other videos, but first and foremost, executive dysfunction is not merely laziness or a lack of desire to do something. And even though it is associated with a lot of different neurological, neurodivergent conditions such as ADD, ADHD, and autism, I would also encourage us to look at the possibility that it is also related to trauma and stress potentially as well. I would even say that it's quite possible that in cases of ADD, ADHD, and autism, that brains that are wired in that neurodivergent capacity, maybe that is also a stress response, but maybe executive dysfunction is also a stress response to those people, but perhaps they undergo trauma and stimulation and stress more intensely because of the way that their brains process external stimuli, especially when you consider things like intense world theory when it comes to autism in particular, and that sense of overstimulation and having more connections and more wiring in the brain than is actually optimal for performance, which can bestow wonderful and beautiful gifts, but which can also make things a little overwhelming as well. So it's something I'm thinking about, and I wanted to share that now. But I think, as I said, I'll probably revisit that in the future too. But for now, if that is something that you're experiencing, please don't worry about just being lazy, because we're figuring out more and more about this as we go. And as I continue to figure out more about it, I intend to touch back and hopefully work out some more understandings around it that will help people to gain more control of their lives and feel more empowered to know that they can rest and integrate when they need it, and also that they can get out of that neurological groove and get back into their flow and into their inspiration and motivation. So I will definitely be working on that, and I will share all my insights as they come. So thank you again for listening, and I will see you in the next video.